The first thing the aliens noticed was the smell. Not a bad smell, not a threatening one, something warm and faintly sweet, like dried grain and clean cloth. It drifted through the arrival corridor of Outpost Veil long before the human woman walked through the doors, and the Veilori dock workers stopped what they were doing and looked at each other with wide, silver eyes. Then she came in. Dara Osai was not a tall woman. She was not heavily built. She wore a grey field jacket with too many pockets, a worn carry bag over one shoulder, and strapped to her chest, in a soft fabric carrier, was a creature so small and so clearly helpless that three of the dock workers took an instinctive step forward, certain something had gone wrong. The creature had no scales, no shell, no visible armor of any kind. Its skin was smooth and a deep warm brown, its head covered in tight dark curls, and it was currently chewing on the edge of the carrier strap with 4 small teeth and a look of intense concentration. It was a human infant, 8 months old. His name was Ren. Dara adjusted the carry bag on her shoulder, nodded to the dock workers, and walked toward the check-in desk like she had done this 100 times, because she had. She was a xenobiologist. She had worked on 6 stations and 2 planetary outposts. She had been to places that made grown soldiers nervous. She had always found it easier to bring Ren than to leave him, because Ren, for all his smallness, was very easy to travel with. He slept when he was tired. He ate when he was hungry, and he was interested in absolutely everything, which meant he never cried out of boredom. The check-in officer was a Veilori, silver-skinned and long-fingered, with 4 small antennae that moved independently of each other. His name was Sorath, and he was, in fact, the senior diplomatic coordinator of the outpost, a position that usually involved greeting high-ranking officials, not women with infants strapped to their chests. He looked at Ren. Ren looked at him. Then Ren's face split into a wide, completely unguarded smile, and he reached both arms outward in Sorath's direction, fingers opening and closing. Sorath's antenna went rigid. "Dr. Osai," he said carefully, "you have brought a young one." "I have," Dara said. "To a diplomatic station." "Yes. In active operation." "That's the one." Sorath looked at Ren again. Ren was still reaching. Sorath's antenna bent slightly toward the child, the way they always did when he was trying to decide something. He had been coordinating arrivals for 23 years. He had processed Belthari ambassadors with ceremonial tail spikes. He had once cleared a Gorath military delegation through in under an hour, and the Gorath were known for being deliberately difficult. He had never processed a human infant. "Is it secured?" Sorath asked. "He's in a carrier." Can he escape the carrier?" Dara looked down at Ren, who had given up on reaching Sorath and had returned to the strap. "Not yet," she said. "He's working on it, though." Sorath processed her credentials in silence. Around the corridor, other station staff had found reasons to stand near the check-in area. A Belthari maintenance worker, 2 Veilori junior clerks, an older Gorath who was absolutely pretending to read something on a wall panel. They were all watching Ren with the same expression, a complicated mix of confusion, concern, and something that might have been wonder. Ren was, by any galactic standard, a biological impossibility. Every species on Outpost Veil was born with some form of defense. The Veilori had a mild chemical deterrent in their skin from birth. The Gorath emerged from eggs already capable of a defensive curl that could crack stone. Even the Belthari, who were considered a gentle people, were born with jaw pressure strong enough to bite through standard metal cable. It was simply how survival worked. The galaxy was large and mostly hostile, and the young of every species reflected that. And then there was Ren. Ren had 4 teeth. He could not walk. He could not crawl quickly. He could not regulate his own temperature, feed himself, or communicate in any recognized language. He was, in every measurable biological sense, the most defenseless creature currently on the station. He could be harmed by a strong wind. He required constant supervision to prevent him from putting dangerous objects in his mouth. He had, on 2 occasions that morning, attempted to eat the carry bag strap. And yet Dara carried him like he was precious, like he was worth protecting at any cost. And Ren, for his part, looked out at the station full of strange large beings with their scales and their antennae and their careful, cautious eyes, and he was not afraid. He was not even cautious. He looked at all of it with the same wide, curious delight he turned on everything, because to Ren, none of it was dangerous. To Ren, all of it was simply interesting. Sorath filed his intake report that evening. Under threat assessment for the human infant, he typed the word none, then paused, then added below it, social disruption, moderate, mechanism unclear. He stared at what he had written. Then he saved it and went to stand near the observation corridor where Dara had set up a small play mat on the floor, surrounded by a few soft objects and one crinkled toy that made a sound like small bells. He watched Ren bat at the toy. The bells rang. Ren laughed. Sorath stood there for longer than he planned to. Later that night, a low vibration moved through the station walls, deep and rhythmic, felt more in the chest than heard with ears. The docking system sent an automated alert to every senior staff terminal. An unscheduled transport had just requested emergency berth clearance. The ship was registered to the Rythkai Sanctuary program, and it was carrying a juvenile. Nobody on Outpost Veil slept well that night. The message that went out from the docking office at the 3rd hour was calm in tone and completely terrifying in content. Elder Vaughn of the Rythkai Sanctuary program had made an emergency stop. His ship had suffered a containment malfunction. He required a temporary berth while repairs were completed. He was sorry for the disruption. He hoped it would cause no concern. The final line read, "Please be advised that the juvenile aboard remains unharmed." Commander Holt, head of the human contingent on Outpost Veil, read the message 3 times. Then he pulled up the Rythkai entry in the station's species database and read for a long time without moving. The Rythkai were ancient, older than the Conclave, older than most of the recorded star maps. They were not members of any diplomatic body because no diplomatic body had ever successfully opened a conversation with them. The ones who tried did not come back, and the ones who came back did not speak about it. The adults were the size of small starships. They breathed superheated plasma. Their scales were harder than battle-grade hull plating, and they shed those scales naturally, which meant the floor around an adult Rythkai was, at any given time, scattered with material that could cut through standard boots. And a juvenile, according to the file, was worse. Not larger, not yet, but the adults were old and calm the way any ancient thing becomes calm through centuries of having nothing left to prove. The juveniles had no such patience. They were curious in the way that fire is curious, hungry, directionless, and very difficult to stop once started. The last recorded incident involving a loose Rythkai juvenile had taken place 40 years ago, a trade station near the outer belt. The station had been evacuated in time. The station itself had not survived. Holt set down his coffee. It had gone cold. By the time the Rythkai transport docked in the lower cargo bay, the largest available space on the station, word had already spread the way bad news always does, quietly and completely. The diplomatic suites began receiving requests, small requests, politely worded. Could the shuttle manifest be updated? Were there available departures in the next few hours? Asking for a colleague, of course. No urgency. Ambassador Deke of the Belthari was the only delegate who did not request a shuttle. He stood in the observation corridor above the cargo bay and vibrated faintly, which was what his species did when they were caught between fear and fascination and could not choose. Elder Vaughn came off the transport in the early morning. He was old in the way that Rythkai get old, not frail, but settled, like a boulder that had been in one place long enough to become part of the landscape. His scales were dark green and silver. He moved carefully and spoke slowly, and his eyes, when he found Holt waiting for him at the bay entrance, held the specific expression of someone who was trying very hard not to show that they were afraid. "The containment lock failed at the second seal," he said. "Graal is in the lower cargo bay. He has not caused damage. He is restless." "Restless," Holt repeated. "He is curious, the new environment, the smells." Vaughn paused. "He will not harm anyone who does not startle him." "How do we not startle him?" Vaughn thought about this for a moment. "Do not make sudden movements. Do not produce high-pitched sounds. Do not approach him directly." A pause. "Do not show fear." Holt looked at the sealed cargo bay door. Behind it, something the size of a ground vehicle was loose in an enclosed space, and it could melt hull plating. "What does fear smell like to him?" he asked. "Everything," Vaughn said simply. "Every species produces it differently, but he can detect all of them. It excites him." Prey response. Holt got on the station radio. He ordered a perimeter at every corridor junction leading to the cargo bay. He instructed all non-essential staff to return to quarters. He asked, very calmly, if anyone on his team was willing to approach the bay door for a visual check. Silence. He did not blame them. He was not walking toward the bay door either. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, because the communication relay to Section 4 had shorted out in the docking surge, and no one had fixed it yet, was that Dara Osai had woken up early that morning. Ren had been fussing at the 5th hour, not crying, just restless in the way he sometimes got, wriggling in his sleep sack and making small sounds until Dara picked him up and walked with him. She had learned early that walking helped. Movement settled him, so she walked, through the residential corridor, through the connector hall, past the storage rooms with their familiar hum of cooling units and pressurized tanks. She was not paying close attention to where she was going. She was paying attention to Ren, who had finally calmed, his cheek resting against her shoulder, one small fist gripping the collar of her jacket. She turned left at the junction instead of right. She pushed through the cargo bay maintenance door because it was unlocked. She walked 4 steps inside. And then she stopped. The cargo bay was very large and mostly dark, and almost entirely filled with the creature standing in the center of it. It turned its head toward her. 2 eyes opened, not like a door opens, but like a furnace does, light coming from somewhere deep within, gold and orange and faintly red, illuminating the dark in a wide shifting glow. The scales across its neck rose slightly. Smoke curled from both nostrils in slow, lazy spirals. It was the size of everything, and it was looking directly at her. Dara stopped breathing. Ren lifted his head from her shoulder. He looked at the creature. The creature looked at him. And then Ren said, clearly and with great enthusiasm, "BAAH." Nobody in the perimeter team saw it happen. The security feed for Section 4 had been down since the docking surge. Holt did not know this yet. He was still at the cargo bay main entrance on the north side, speaking to Elder Vaughn in a low voice about options, timelines, and the fastest way to get a replacement containment lock fitted without disturbing the juvenile. Inside the cargo bay, Dara did not move. This was not a choice she made consciously. It was the same deep stillness that comes over certain people when they are standing very close to something large and wild, not frozen, but quieted, all unnecessary movement stopped by some part of the brain that is older than language and wiser than panic. She had been still like this before, once near a creature on a coastal research station that had 3 rows of teeth and a threat radius of 40 meters. Once inside a bioluminescent cave system where the organisms responded to vibration. Once, memorably, in a field on a station colony where something had moved in the tall grass, and she had not yet known what it was. She was still like this now. Graal had not moved either. He was enormous. Up close, the scale of him changed the way the space felt. The cargo bay was not small, but he filled it the way weather fills a room, not just physically but atmospherically, like the air itself knew to pay attention. His scales were deep black at the edges and dark red toward the center, and they caught the faint emergency lighting in a way that made him look like something carved from cooling rock. The smoke from his nostrils drifted upward and hung in the recycled air. He was looking at Ren. Graal had encountered many things in his young life. He had encountered fear, the particular stiffening and chemical bloom of it that came from every creature he had ever been near. He had encountered aggression, which smelled sharp and specific, and which he understood. He had encountered submission, which smelled like the absence of everything. He had encountered the careful, neutral behavior of Elder Vaughn, who had learned over years how to smell like nothing threatening without smelling like prey. He had never encountered this. The small creature on the larger creature's chest was producing no chemical signals that Graal recognized. Not fear, Not aggression, not submission. There was warmth, biological warmth, and something milky and soft, and a faint sweetness that was not food and not threat and not anything he had a category for. And the small creature was looking at him the way nothing had ever looked at him before. Not away, not sideways, not at the floor. Directly at him. And it had made a sound. Graal tilted his head. He did it slowly, the way very large things move when they are being careful, the way a landmass would move if a landmass were curious. The smoke from his left nostril thickened slightly. Ren watched the smoke. His eyes tracked it. Then he made the sound again, slightly louder, and waved one fist in a motion that was entirely without meaning and entirely without fear. Dara was calculating. She did it the way she always did, quickly, quietly in the back of her mind, while the front of her mind stayed present and calm. The juvenile had not attacked. The juvenile had not made a threat display, at least none that she recognized from what she had read. He was watching Ren. Ren was not screaming or crying. Ren was, in fact, demonstrably interested, which was the thing Ren always was in the presence of new things. Her options were to back out slowly, which might trigger pursuit, or to stay still and see what happened next. She stayed still. Then she sat down, slowly, carefully, with both legs folding under her until she was on the cargo bay floor, Ren in her lap, his back against her chest. She kept her hands visible. She kept her breathing slow. And because her brain needed something to do other than produce fear signals, she started talking quietly, in the low, unhurried way she had always talked to Ren when they were in new places. Not to Graal, just to Ren. The words themselves did not matter. The tone was the thing. "There he is," she said softly. "Look at that. That's a very big friend. Yes, very, very big. Look at those scales. Have you ever seen anything like that? No, you haven't. Nobody has." Graal's head lowered by a fraction. "He's not going to do anything," Dara said, still in the same quiet voice. "And neither are we. We're just going to sit here for a while, that's all. That's the whole plan." Graal lowered his head a little more. Ren, with the absolute conviction of a creature who has never been told something is impossible, reached both arms out toward Graal and opened and closed his fingers. Graal leaned forward. He moved slowly, far more slowly than something his size had any reason to move, until his face was close enough that his breath, hot and faintly sulfurous, washed over both of them. Ren blinked at the warmth. His hair moved. He looked at Graal's nose, which was at this distance approximately the size of Ren's entire body. Then Ren grabbed a scale. It was one of the smaller ones, along the upper jaw, and he grabbed it the way he grabbed everything, with both hands, with total commitment, with a grip that was much stronger than it looked. He held on and looked very pleased with himself. Graal went absolutely still. He stayed still for a long time. And then slowly, with a sound like very distant thunder rolling through stone, he lay down. Dara let out one careful breath, just one. She kept her voice steady. "Good boy," she said, and it was not entirely clear which one of them she was talking to. In the observation room far above, a camera that nobody knew was still running recorded all of it in silence. The camera in Cargo Bay 4 was a backup unit, installed during the station's original construction and mostly forgotten since then. It had no audio. It stored footage locally to a buffer that was checked, manually, once every 3 days. Nobody had looked at it in a week. The maintenance tech who found the footage was a young Velori named Osk, who had been sent to Section 4 to fix the dead communication relay and had taken a wrong turn into the monitoring room. He was there for 6 minutes before he noticed the feed. He watched it for approximately 30 seconds, then he called Sorath. Sorath watched it for 2 minutes, then he called Commander Holt. Holt watched it without speaking. He watched it again, then he sat down. The footage showed everything: Dara walking in, the juvenile turning, Ren reaching forward, the long, impossible stillness. And then, and this was the part that Holt watched 4 times, because he needed to be sure his eyes were not doing something strange, Graal lying down, not collapsing, not being subdued, choosing slowly and deliberately to lower himself to the cargo bay floor and staying there while a human woman and her infant son sat quietly in front of him. The footage did not have sound. It did not need it. She's been in there for 3 hours, Holt said finally. Yes, Sorath said. And she never came out. She sent a text message through the maintenance relay at the first hour. She said, Sorath checked his notes. Ren fell asleep. Don't come in yet. Holt was quiet for a moment and growled. Still there, the biosensors on the bay wall are still running. His temperature has dropped 2 degrees. His respiratory rate is, the texts say it matches a pattern they have no category for. They are calling it, Sorath paused. They are calling it a resting state, which Rythkai juveniles do not have, or are not supposed to have. He's calm, Holt said. He appears to be calm, yes. Holt looked at the frozen last frame of the footage, Dara sitting with her back against a cargo container, Ren asleep against her chest, and Graal coiled loosely around both of them like a landscape, his great head resting on the floor 3 meters away, eyes half closed, smoke rising from his nostrils in slow, even curls. Send the footage to Elder Vaughn, Holt said, and don't send it anywhere else until I say so. He said so 4 hours later, after Dara had finally walked out of the cargo bay with a sleeping Ren, nodded at the 3 security officers who were standing in the corridor with their mouths open, asked if there was any food available, and sat down on a corridor bench to eat a protein bar while Graal pressed his nose against the sealed bay door from the inside and produced a sound that made the walls vibrate. By that point, Sorath had already sent the footage to 3 Veilori network contacts because he was, despite everything, a coordinator by profession, and he could not help it. It was everywhere within 6 hours. The galactic news networks did not know what to call it. Their initial reports used words like incident and encounter and anomaly. One Belthari outlet called it an apparent diplomatic development of unknown significance. An older Gorath network ran the footage under the headline Rythkai Juvenile Subdued and was corrected very quickly when viewers pointed out that nothing in the footage looked like subduing. The Rythkai did not respond to press requests. They never did. The footage was watched, in the first day alone, by an estimated 400 million individuals across 12 species on 9 separate star systems. They watched a small human woman sit on the floor of a cargo bay and talk quietly to her infant while the most dangerous juvenile predator in the known galaxy, destroyer of a moon's atmosphere, breaker of containment locks, a creature that had once caused mass evacuations simply by being in transit, lay down like an animal that had found a warm patch of sun. And there was sound after all, it turned out. The backup camera had no audio, but the biosensor array on the bay wall had a microphone built in for pressure readings, and when the technicians pulled those records, they found it. A sound, low and subsonic, mostly below what most species could hear, rhythmic, even. The structure analysis team flagged it as a mechanical fault for 20 minutes before someone realized it was coming from the juvenile, not from the station. Graal had been purring. Not a word that existed in Rythkai behavioral documentation. Not a sound that had ever been recorded from any Rythkai, juvenile or adult. The xenobiologists who received the audio file spent 3 days arguing about whether to use that word before finally agreeing that no other word was accurate. Ambassador Deke, who had watched the footage 11 times, had stopped vibrating and started doing something else. A stillness that his cultural attaché privately described in a message home as the closest his species ever came to reverence. Sorath revised his report again. He deleted the field for social disruption, moderate. He sat for a long time looking at the blank space where it had been. Then he typed, slowly, pending further study, recommend reclassification of all existing human ASSESSMENTS. And in the cargo bay, behind a sealed door, Graal pressed his nose to the metal and waited. He did not understand where the small warm thing had gone. He did not understand why. He understood very little still. He was young, and the world was large. But he remembered warmth and small hands and a sound like bells. And he waited because something told him, in whatever way things tell juveniles anything, that the small warm thing would come back. He was right. 3 days after the footage went out, the questions started arriving. Not from journalists. The diplomatic office had blocked press access the moment it became clear the story was spreading. The questions came from researchers, from behavioral scientists working in universities across 4 systems, from Rythkai scholars who had spent their careers studying juvenile development in theory, because studying it in practice required proximity, and proximity to a Rythkai juvenile was not something that tended to produce long academic careers. And eventually, the questions came in the form of a formal request from the Veilori conclave itself, a carefully worded document asking that Dr. Os make herself available for a session with the station council. Dara agreed. She brought Ren because she did not have anyone to leave him with, and because, frankly, she had stopped worrying about whether Ren was appropriate for formal settings. Around the same time, he had spent a nap cycle curled against the neck of a planet-trekking apex predator. The council chamber held 11 beings. Sorath sat to one side taking notes. Elder Vaughn was present, which was unusual. He was not a political figure, but no one had wanted to tell him he could not attend. Ambassador Deke sat in the back and vibrated faintly at a frequency that he had learned to suppress in enclosed spaces but could not entirely eliminate. Dara sat across from all of them with Ren on her knee. Ren was chewing on a small cloth toy shaped like a fish. The first question came from the lead Veilori researcher, an older woman named Orev, who folded her long fingers together and looked at Dara with an expression that was trying very hard to be scientific. "Dr. Os," she said, "we want to understand what your offspring did in the cargo bay." "He grabbed a scale," Dara said. "Before that, he said Bara." A pause. "Is that a threat display?" "No," Dara said. "It means he saw something interesting." Orev wrote something down. "What we are struggling to understand," she said carefully, "is the behavioral mechanism. Every species we have studied produces fear responses from birth. These are not learned behaviors. They are instinct. Chemical, physiological, and behavioral fear responses are present in all known infants because they serve a survival function." She paused. "Your offspring produced none of these responses in the presence of a Rythkai juvenile. We have the biosensor data. His cortisol analog did not change. His heart rate did not change. He showed no physical signs of threat recognition at all." "He's 8 months old," Dara said. "Yes, that is what we cannot explain." Dara looked at Ren, who had finished with the fish toy and was now examining his own hand with great focus. "Human infants don't really have fully developed fear responses yet," she said. "Not to things they haven't learned to be afraid of. We're not born knowing what's dangerous. We learn it. From our parents, from experience, from the environment. It takes time." The room was quiet. "You are saying," Orev said slowly, "that fear in humans is acquired, not innate." "For most things, yes. Basic startle reflex is there from birth, a loud noise, a sudden drop, that sort of thing, but complex threat recognition, he hasn't learned that yet, to him. Graal was just new, big and warm and interesting." Elder Vaughn, who had not spoken until now, leaned forward slightly. His voice was slow and considered, the voice of someone who had spent decades choosing words carefully. "The Rythkai juvenile responds to threat signals," he said. "It is the fundamental basis of their juvenile behavior. They identify threat and respond. They identify submission and respond. They identify prey and respond." He paused. "Your offspring produced no signal they have evolved to react to." He was a gap. "A category with no response assigned." "So Graal didn't know what to do with him," Dara said. "No, and Rythkai juveniles, when they encounter something they have no response for, they become curious. And curiosity, in a juvenile, is rare enough that it suppresses other drives." Vaughn was quiet for a moment. "I have been Graal's keeper for 11 years. I have never seen him calm. What I observed in that cargo bay, I do not have language for." Ambassador Deke made a sound from the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at him. He had stopped vibrating and was sitting very still, which was the Belthari equivalent of someone standing up suddenly at a dinner table. "I have a question," he said, "not a scientific one." He looked at Dara. "Did you know, when you walked in, did you know the child would be safe?" The room held its breath. Dara was quiet for a moment. She looked at Ren, who had moved on from his hand and was now trying to reach the edge of the table. She looked at the 11 beings across from her, watching her with careful, waiting eyes. She thought about the right answer, about the answer that would make humans sound wise, or capable, or calculated. She decided against it. No, she said, I didn't know what Graal was going to do. I had a guess, based on animal behavior I've studied, but it was a guess. A pause. I was terrified for the whole 3 hours. The room was very still. But Ren wasn't, Dara said, and I think that was the thing. Sorath wrote something in his notes. He looked at it for a moment, then he added one more line below it. Outside the council chamber, in the residential corridor, Ren had been given a teething ring by a Veilori clerk who had found one in the supply room and offered it with the careful solemnity of someone presenting a diplomatic gift. Ren had accepted it the same way he accepted everything, with immediate delight and both hands. The clerk had gone back to her desk and sat for a long time, thinking about what it would be like to go through the world like that. She did not have a word for it. Neither did anyone else. The repair on the containment lock took 9 days. In those 9 days, 3 things happened. The first was that Graal got noticeably worse every time Dara was not in or near the cargo bay. Not violent, he did not damage anything, but he paced, which was enough on its own to make the floor vibrate and crack 2 of the secondary wall panels. He pressed his nose to the bay door at irregular hours. He made a sound that the structural monitors kept flagging as a pressure anomaly until someone relabeled it manually in the system as juvenile Rythkai, attention-seeking behavior. Do not escalate. The second was that Dara started going to the cargo bay twice a day, sometimes 3 times, with Ren in the carrier and a thermos of tea for herself. She would sit near the bay door with it cracked slightly, not enough for Graal to get through, just enough for the smell and sound to pass, and she would talk to Ren about small things while Graal settled on the other side, and the subsonic purring would start within minutes, and the structural monitors would show his temperature dropping to the resting state that had no category name yet, but was becoming a fairly well-documented phenomenon by day 4. The third thing was the formal request from the Rythkai Sanctuary program. It came through Elder Vaughn, in writing, addressed to Commander Holt, and copied to the Veilori Conclave diplomatic office. It was 3 pages long and written in the careful, dense language that ancient organizations use when they are asking for something they have no precedent for asking. It took Sorath 2 hours to work through it and produce a plain summary. The summary was, the Sanctuary program was requesting that a human presence accompany Graal's transport for the remainder of the journey to the Sanctuary world, not as crew, not as observers, as what the document called a stabilizing social contact for the juvenile. They want us to come, Dara said, reading the summary at Holt's desk. They want Ren to come, Holt said, which was more accurate and which he immediately regretted saying out loud. Dara looked at the request. She looked at Ren, who was on the floor beside the desk, pulling himself upright using the desk leg, very proud of himself. He had discovered standing 3 days ago and could not stop doing it. I'll go, she said. Dara. He likes us, she said. Graal, he's calm when we're around. If the alternative is 11 more weeks of him packing through space and cracking wall panels, I would rather just go. Holt tried several arguments. He had prepared them in advance, which showed how well he knew her. None of them worked. He signed the authorization 3 hours later and spent the rest of the afternoon looking at the ceiling. The departure was quiet. Sorath was at the dock. He had a small carved stone disc in his hand, Veilori, ceremonial, given traditionally to beings of great courage. He stood in front of Dara for a moment. He looked at Ren. He looked back at Dara. Then he placed the disc in Dara's palm and held out a second, smaller one, plain, uncarved, that he had stayed up the previous night smoothing from raw material, and pressed it into Ren's hand. Both, Sorath said. Then he walked back to his station without further comment. Ren tried to eat the disc. Dara stopped him. She put both in her jacket pocket and carried them for years afterward. The transport to the Sanctuary world took 63 days. Elder Vaughn later described those 63 days as the most peaceful and most confusing of his career. Graal was calm the entire journey, not sedated, not confined, simply calm, in the resting state that had now been formally documented and named in 3 separate academic papers under various complicated titles that all meant approximately the same thing. Graal was happy. He ate regularly. He slept well. He stopped cracking things. Ren learned to walk on day 31 of the journey, which happened in the corridor outside the cargo bay, while Dara was holding his hands and walking backward, and which produced a sound from behind the cargo bay door that brought 2 crew members running before they realized it was not a structural alert, but Graal, reacting to the sudden change in noise and smell from the corridor. Vaughn, who had witnessed this, wrote a very long note in his observation journal and then sat quietly for a while. On day 31, Ren walked on his own for the first time, staggered 4 steps and sat down. He looked very surprised. Then he got up and tried again. On day 63, they arrived at the sanctuary world. It was a large planet, warm, low gravity, with deep valleys that held warmth well and open ranges that could sustain a creature that would one day be the size of a city block. Good place for a Rythkai to grow up. Elder Vaughn had chosen it carefully over years. He had never expected to feel anything about leaving. He found, standing at the habitat boundary, that he was wrong about that. Dara stood with Ren at the outer fence. Ren had learned to run in an unsteady, delighted way in the last 2 weeks and could not be trusted near open ground, so she held his hand. He strained toward the fence. He had not seen Graal since the ship. Graal had gone directly to the habitat, which was correct and proper. Then Graal came around the far tree line. He was faster than he looked when he wanted to be. He covered the ground between the trees and the fence quickly and stopped just on the other side, close enough that his breath fogged the air around the barrier. His eyes were open fully, gold and orange and red, warm as anything Dara had ever seen. Ren pressed his face against the fence. Both hands gripped the mesh. Graal pressed his nose to the other side. They stayed like that for a long time, the fence between them, neither of them in any hurry. Across 40 star systems, beings who had spent centuries fearing the Rythkai watched the footage of the departure, the journey, and this final moment, the great scaled head against the fence, the small face on the other side, and came to the same quiet conclusion. No one said it out loud. It was the kind of thing that felt smaller when you put words around it, but most of them watched it more than once. Some of them watched it many times, and a few of them, species who had never in their long histories used the word tender to describe anything that lived in space, found themselves looking for a new word entirely. They did not find one, but they kept looking. That, perhaps, was what humans had always been for.